Hi, everybody. We are here. We are live. This is it. This is the Pen Parentis Literary Salon, the grand finale of our 25th season. And this is our 25th season. This is my 100th show. And I can't even get over it. It's, wow. I've done 100 of these. Hi, I'm MM DeVoe, and I'm the founder of Pen Parentis, and this is Christina Chiu, and she is the curator of Pen Parentis Literary Salons, and also on our board. And she's also the author of Beauty, which is a Kirkus best book of 2020, so you should probably buy it if you feel like a good beach read. And let's see, what else? We have a really cool show for you tonight. I'm calling it a show now, because, you know, it's a show. We're on screen and you're cooking or whatever you're doing out there. And we're like, you know, here. Hey, Joseph Kennedy, it's good to see you. I can't see you, but I know you're there because you said hi. If anybody else would say hi, we can also say hi back. This is we have new cool technology that we can like know when you're talking to us. Let's see, what else can I tell you? It is May. We are going to be dark for the rest of the summer. So, you know, mark your calendars for September because that's when we do this again. This Grand Slam, we have 3 awesome writers. And among them, they have more than 25 books. They're pretty spectacular. And Christina is going to tell us some more about them. Take it away, lady.
Hello, everyone. So this is our last salon before we break for the summer. And so it's the perfect time to actually discuss what it's going to be like with these awesome authors. Tonight we have Joshua Henkin. He's the author of Swimming Across the Hudson, Matrimony, and The World Without You. His new novel, Morningside Heights, is coming out this June. He's the father of 2 daughters. We have Sergio Troncoso. He's the author of 8 books, A Peculiar Kind of Immigrant Son, The Last Tortilla and Other Stories, Crossing Borders, and others, including Nobody's Pilgrim, which is forthcoming in 2022. Alice Elliott Dark is our final reader, and she's the author of Think of England and 2 collections of short stories, In the Gloaming and Naked to the Waist. Everyone, please welcome our author.
We are so excited, yay! One thing I do want to say before we pull everybody up and everybody can see our famous, fabulous authors, but I do want to shout out real quick to Mina, Betsy, Perry, David, and Mai. Thanks so much for donating a little extra. We highly appreciate it. And of course, to all of our sponsors and also if you are a sponsor and you want to be shouted out to, then you have to email me or text me or somehow let me know, because I won't know that unless you tell me. So yeah, without further ado, let us get to know these writers. Let us find out everything about them. It's pretty fun. Go, Christine.
Okay, so our first author, I'm going to give a longer introduction now because actually all 3 of these authors had these gigantic bios. And so I'm going to give something a little fuller this time around because it's no joke. The number of books that these people have written is crazy. Joshua Henkin, like I said, is the author of the novel Swimming Across the Hudson. It's a Los Angeles Times Notable Book Award, won that award. He's the author of Matrimony, a New York Times Notable Book, and The World Without You, which was named an Editor's Choice Book by the New York Times and the Chicago Tribune. It was also the winner of the 2012 Edward Lewis Wallen Award for Jewish American Fiction and a finalist for the 2012 National Jewish Book Award. Joshua's new novel, Morningside Heights, will be published by Pantheon in June 2021 and is available right now for pre-order. He directs and teaches in the MFA program in fiction at Brooklyn College. He's a dad of 2. Everyone, please welcome Joshua Henkin.
Thank you. It's very nice to be here. So, Christina, am I supposed to read now? Is that what I'm supposed to do?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. I knew that was coming at some point. I just didn't know what point. So I'm just basically going to read the first page and a half of Morningside Heights, which will be coming out on June 15th. This is from the very opening of the book. Growing up in Bexley in the suburbs of Columbus, Prue had been drawn to the older boys, thinking they could take her far from home. Her father was from Brooklyn, her mother from Manhattan's Upper East Side, but they met in the middle of the country in Ann Arbor at a freshman mixer in 1944. Prue's father was studying engineering, and when he graduated, he went to work for GM. But he wasn't cut out for the auto industry, for its assembly lines and economies of scale, and Prue's mother didn't like Detroit and its suburbs, 10-mile road, 11-mile road, 12-mile road, everything measured in a car. But Prue's father was happy in the Midwest, and when an opportunity arose in Columbus, he settled on it. And on Torah Academy, where Prue, as a kindergartner, was dropped off every morning at 8 o'clock. Prue liked the Hebrew songs, liked apples dipped in honey on Rosh Hashanah, liked staying home on Passover and eating matzah brei. But kindergarten became first grade, became second, became third, and she started to feel constrained. She had an older brother, Hank, but they weren't close. It was just her and the other students in her class. Torah Academy is so Jewish, she told her parents. Well, it is a Jewish school, her mother said. In 8th grade, on a trip to New York, the students were taken to the Streit's Matzah factory and to Ratner's for lunch. Years later, living in New York, Prue went out to La Différence, a kosher French restaurant, ostensibly high-end. But when she tasted her food, she told her friend Camille, La Différence is this food sucks. Prue's mother wasn't Orthodox. She'd agreed to keep a kosher home for Prue's father. And one time, a friend of Prue's saw Prue's mother page got stuck at a restaurant eating breaded shrimp. When Prue confronted her mother, her mother said that when Prue turned 18, she could eat as much breaded shrimp as she wanted to. Was that why she was attracted to older men? If she couldn't be 18, she would go out with boys who were 18. In 7th grade, she dated a 10th grader, captain of the JV basketball team. In high school, she went out with a young man, soon to graduate from Ohio State. She was 2 months shy of her 18th birthday when she arrived at Yale in 1972. There was breaded shrimp to be had everywhere, but a curious thing happened those first few weeks at college. It wasn't that she missed her parents, though late at night, listening to her sleeping roommates, she would think of her family back in Ohio and grow teary-eyed. She lay in her dorm in her Ohioans for McGovern t-shirt, while Derek and the Dominoes looked down at her from the wall. She shivered. Wasn't it supposed to be warmer on the East Coast? Fall had come early that year, and walking across Old Campus, she was already wearing a parka. Torah Academy was eons ago. She'd gone to public high school, where her graduating class had been 400 strong, but she wasn't prepared to be so far from home. Torah Academy had seemed too small and too Jewish. Now Yale seemed too big and not Jewish enough. Okay, I'll stop there. Thanks.
Yay! Good
Thank
job.
you.
Thank you.
So a lot of your books are about marriage.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know if they're about marriage, but there's some marriages in them for sure.
How much do you base on your real life? Like, do you really take issues that occur with your family and take make a spin on it, and it ends up in your work?
Yeah, I mean, a friend of mine said that, all good fiction is emotionally autobiographical. And I think what she means by that is that, the facts may be entirely invented, but you want to be at risk on the page in some way. I mean, I think, you get asked if are your dreams, are your dreams autobiographical? Well, by some definition they are, because you had them. But the characters in your dreams are doing things that are often quite different from what you do in real life. This particular book happens to be the one of my four that's most borrowed from actual life. It's about a professor at Columbia who develops early Alzheimer's. And my father was a professor at Columbia who got Alzheimer's much later in life. But it's definitely an emotionally autobiographical book. But I think you always have to be on the page in some way, whether the facts are true or not.
Do you feel like it gives you distance from your life to write it as fiction, or does it make you closer to life?
Well, I teach fiction writing, and the first workshop I was in as a student years ago, a woman in the class wrote a story that was basically about her breakup with her first boyfriend, but it was actually a lot better than that sounds. But it was transparently autobiographical, and people said, this was working, but everyone agreed there was a certain scene that wasn't working. And when it was her turn to speak, she said, well, that scene that wasn't working, it actually happened. And, to me, the appropriate response to that is a kind, gentle version of, who cares? That we tell fiction, we write fiction to get at a deeper kind of truth. And so I think you obviously, I think you want to, you want to write what you know about what you don't know, or write what you don't know about what you know. It sounds like a bad GRE problem, but I think it's sort of a way of negotiating the difference between being too close to your material and too far from your material. If you're too close to your material, you can't make the right aesthetic choices to get at that more complicated truth. And if you're too far from your material, then you're not sufficiently emotionally invested in what the characters are doing.
Right.
It's really a question of what's at stake.
Right. I think that's true.
Yeah.
Great.
Awesome.
Great. Perfect. Thank you.
We're going to get more from him later. This is very exciting.
Okay. Our next reader is Sergio Troncoso. Like I said, he's the author of 8 books, 2 of which are forthcoming. Among the numerous awards he's won are the K. Catarula Award for Best Short Story, the Premio Aztlán Literary Prize, the International Latino Book Award for Best Collection of Short Stories, Southwest Book Award, Bronze Award for Essays for Forward Reviews, and the Silver and Bronze Awards for Multicultural Adult Fiction from the Forward Reviews. He's a Fulbright Scholar. He's also inducted into the Hispanic Scholarship Fund's Alumni Hall of Fame and the Texas Institute of Letters. And he's received the Literary Legacy Award from the El Paso Community College. He is a father of 2. Everyone please welcome Sergio Troncoso.
Yay!
Hi, Christina and Nilda. Thank you very much for inviting me to Pen Parentis again. I love being here. I'm going to read from this book that just came out, Nepantla Familias. I'm the editor of the collection, and it's basically 30 new works, largely unpublished. 25 of the 30 are unpublished, from excellent Mexican-American writers. We have essays, we have poetry, and we had short stories. And it just got a starred review from Kirkus Review. So it's an exciting new anthology, very forward-looking. And I'm going to read from my essay, which is nonfiction, but it sort of gets into my parenting. And maybe we could talk about parenting on the Upper West Side and what I learned from my parents after you hear this. So this is from my essay called Life is Crossing Borders. And I grew up very poor along the Mexican border, and then ended up, in New York and Boston and the Ivy League. So when people find out how I grew up and where I grew up, they invariably ask, how did you get from a place like Isleta in the US-Mexico border to Harvard and then Yale? The short answer is that I translated the Mexican immigrant values of my parents into values that would help me succeed in education and writing. The short answer, of course, misses the uncertainty, the failures, the adaptations on the fly, the stupid choices, how I learned to persevere, the grit my parents gave me, the accountability they demanded of me. The long answer is another story. After school at South Loop School and at Isleta High School, my brothers and my sister and I had to work. Why? Because my parents, Rodolfo and Berta Troncoso, believed we would get into trouble in our neighborhood if we were idle. So on a Saturday, instead of going to the mall, my parents handed us hoes and shovels and a wheelbarrow to clean the irrigation canal behind our house. Now, we didn't own the canal, but my parents thought it would be, quote, good for the neighborhood, unquote, to keep it clean. We cleaned the street in front of our house. We pulled out weeds from the sidewalk. We trimmed the trees in our yard. We carried the debris to the dump. Other Saturdays and Sundays, we carted brick to build our patio, or loaded lumber from Cashway to add another room to our adobe house, or shoveled gravel and mixed cement to build a small basketball court in our backyard. As my mother would repeatedly say to us, "There's no tired in my house." You might ask, how did this work until you drop mentality help you with your education? Well, as a kid, I got sick of working for my father. I called him our Mexican Stalin. He took our family from an agrarian lifestyle and a patch of dirt in the Chihuahuan desert to an industrialized lifestyle and a lower middle class life. How? With our slave labor, by blood and sweat. By using our work to create value for our family, value in our home, value in the old dilapidated apartments he bought and we renovated, on which he would work after his 40 hours per week job as a draftsman. My mother was just as bad, both of them duros, disciplined and determined. Mr. and Mrs. Joseph Stalin Troncoso. Once I convinced my brothers to strike and rebel from our backbreaking work at Los Departamentos to get my father to pay us a grand wage of 25 cents an hour. School was my only escape from my parents. To do well in school so that I didn't have to lug more cinder block or drive another truckload of escombro to the dump, I had to work, but this time with my mind. Teachers, of course, became instrumental in translating this disciplined and work ethic into mental work that would help me in school. And none were more important than Pearl Crouch and Josefina Gutierrez Kynard, my high school journalism teacher. Mrs. Crouch reminded me of an angled version of my tough abuelita, Doña Dolores Rivero, who survived as a teenager during the Mexican Revolution. Mrs. Crouch would dissect every lead I wrote, tear apart my news stories, and show me where they were lacking in clarity or substance, or where I needed to go back and ask more questions to find out more details. What she was teaching me was how to look at my own work from afar, as an editor, how to dissect it so that a reader would be transported and informed and maybe surprised, all in the same news story. La Gutierrez was kinder than Mrs. Crouch, but no less demanding. Rewrite after rewrite after rewrite. That's how you become a good writer, with this critical, in the trenches, sentence by sentence, literary spadework. But you need to sublimate your ego, you need to be ready to work, and you need to appreciate that what matters is not what's on the page or what's not on the page, that what is what's on the page and or what's not on the page, and not how tired you feel about the process. I responded to Mrs. Crouch's demands by working harder, and she responded by giving me opportunities. This is a simple lesson that I learned from her and that I applied to my own students at the Yale Writers Workshop. I will give you work, and I expect you to work as hard as I do, and I expect you to finish that work. And if you don't, if you come up with excuses or complaints, I don't want you in my class. There's the door. Thank you.
Yay!
So maybe this will lead into parenting on the Upper West Side, but where I raised my kids.
Well, before we even get there, Sergio, how is it that you're in a preschool right now?
So I'm in Texas doing all sorts of events for this book that just came out a couple of weeks ago. And my brother and my sister-in-law are both school teachers. One is a high school teacher, and my sister-in-law is a kindergarten teacher, so hence the background.
Ah, I see. That makes a lot of sense.
And tell us about the title of your book, because we had a lot of discussion about it before in the green room.
Yeah, so Nepantla is the Nahuatl word, which is the Aztec language, and it's called Nepantla Familia, so it's Nahuatl, Spanish, and then an anthology of Mexican-American literature on families in between worlds, English. So it literally straddles the three worlds, that Mexican Americans experience. And Nepantla means living in the middle, creating a hybrid self of many different selves, in the middle between Spanish and English, between old values and new values you're adopting as an American, between psychologies. And it really is a word that was brought forth by a great philosopher, Gloria Anzaldúa, was a terrific feminist before the word even really was in vogue. And she wrote a terrific book on Nepantla and really talked about how crossing borders was essential in many ways, philosophically, psychologically, linguistically, to the Mexican American experience. And I make the argument in my introduction that it's really actually a universal experience, whether you're going from a rural area to an urban area, or you're going from, rural Texas to the Ivy League, and you have no clue what the Ivy League is, or you're moving, or you're marrying somebody from a different race, from a different religion, from a different, place that you grew up in. So that's what Nepantla means: living in between, and creating.
It's a very useful word. And I think it's lovely. And does it have a negative or positive connotation in its original, or is it just a word?
No, it's not necessarily negative or positive. Yeah, and as you'll see, like if you pick up the anthology, just got a starred review from Kirkus, there are some people who navigate these worlds successfully, and then there are some people who, were abused by their parents, and maybe there was too much machismo in their growing up, and they had to break free. And there's a couple of essays on gender identity. What is it to be a man? And this is not just a question, of course, within the Mexican American experience, but we're looking at it through that lens. And so all of that is in the collection. The people who successfully navigate this minefield, so to speak, of living in between worlds, and then some people in which it is really just a way to define the pain and a wound that has not yet healed.
And then the people that are all in the collection, they were chosen because they're splitting some kind of world, or they're chosen because there's Mexican heritage or Aztec heritage, or what was the unifying factor of the choice of the people that are, I was going to say the humans that are in the
so I mean,
collection.
I was contracted to create a Mexican American anthology.
I see.
And so all the writers are Mexican American, and what I wanted from them is not old work. So of the 30 pieces in this collection, 25 are unpublished, and only of the 5 published, only one of them has appeared in a book. The other appeared in literary essays in the last, let's say, 2 years. So it's basically new work.
Fresh.
And we have people like Sandra Cisneros. You want to read the latest poem from Sandra Cisneros? The last thing she's written the last 10 years? It's in this book. It's nowhere else. And Reina Grande, who's a best-selling author, Alex Espinosa, Daniel Chacon, Cheryl Luna, some terrific writers. Jose Antonio Rodriguez, who's I think just published his 3rd poem in the New Yorker. So these are writers that are breaking new ground and that are showing the talent we have in our community. People who have won, not only the MacArthur, Penn Faulkner, some of the biggest prizes out there. And unfortunately, of course, in New York, most of the time you ignore Mexican Americans and in the literary community. And we're doing absolutely very well. And this is a way to highlight that community. And so it's a terrific new anthology of new work. And like Helena Viramontes, I'm sure some of your older writers know her. She has taught at Cornell. She was basically the one who taught Junot Diaz. Junot Diaz was a student of hers. So some old writers and then some new writers like Stephanie Lee. I'll just say one other thing. Stephanie Lee, for example, is writing about having a Mexican mother and a Chinese father. So that's another borderland that she's crossing. A very different, cultures, traditions, psychology.
Yeah, bringing 2 cultures together is really interesting, because what do you keep and what do you not keep? And
Exactly.
It has a lot to do with how you experienced it in your family, whether you thought it was oppressive or liberating, whether you thought it was tradition or old. I mean, there's
Right.
there's almost everything can be seen in many
Yeah.
different ways. I was putting up a couple of comments. I know that some people can't see them, but Mai Hong DeVore just ordered the anthology. And
No, thank you.
and Joe
Thank you.
Kennedy said that he's read a lot of your works and that they're all excellent. So
Yeah, and I mean, and like I embody, my wife is Jewish from Chicago and Boston, and I grew up Mexican, and our kids grew up on the Upper West Side, that know Spanish and had bar mitzvahs. So talk about combining worlds,
there's a lot of crossing over.
and then
There's
to
a lot of
impress,
intersections.
and to impress, for example, my mother-in-law, and I wrote for Hadassah magazine about a Latino in a Jewish world. And when my mother-in-law saw me in Hadassah magazine, she started showing all her friends, here's my son-in-law, he's a real writer. He appears in Hadassah magazine, and actually they paid very well before Bernie Madoff ripped them off. So anyway, I think we all embody a sense of combining different worlds and different cultures and different, places and in our families.
I think a lot of people can relate to being in that middle gray zone. So I think it's something that'll resonate with a lot of people.
Yeah.
So we will talk more about the kids and everything, especially since summer's coming up. But I just want to introduce our final reader and give her a chance to read. Our final reader tonight is Alice Elliott Dark. She's the author of Think England and 2 collections of short stories, The Gloaming and Naked to the Waist. Her work has appeared in the New Yorker, Harper's, the New York Times, Best American Short Stories, and O. Henry. Her award-winning story, In the Gloaming, was made into 2 films. Dark is a past recipient of a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship. She's an associate professor at Rutgers Newark in the MFA program. She has a son who also is a writer. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Wonderful. Everyone, please welcome Alice Elliott Dark.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. I'm going to read a little bit from, I have a new book coming February 2022. This is the cover. It's called Fellowship Point. So I'm going to read a little bit from that. And this is about having a baby. And this scene takes place in about 1945. Marriage was based on trust. She'd heard that all her life. Trust bypassed questions. Trust operated on the premise that all would become clear in time. She'd never asked about lovemaking or childbirth. She gleaned that both would hurt to some degree. Otherwise, she trusted and was ill-prepared. Lovemaking stopped hurting very quickly, thank God. But childbirth hurt before she was knocked out and afterward, and she assumed the worst pain had come in the middle. It was cruel that no one had told her what it would be like, especially her doctor, who had seen her over and over. He betrayed her, she thought darkly, in the delivery room. But afterward, beyond the pain, she was a mother. She had presents to open and notes to write and new routines to figure out and establish, and above and beyond all that was the real consideration. She had the baby to take joy and pleasure in and to marvel at, the incredible baby. She searched for joy. He looks like your father. He looks like Dick. He looks like a Martian. What funny faces. She smiled and agreed he looked like whatever was suggested. She couldn't see anything in him. Sometimes she wondered if he really were her baby, and sometimes if she'd even had a baby. Crazy ideas. Yet she couldn't shake them off. Her flat stomach persuaded her that nothing had happened. It had all been a dream. He was miles away from the people who made faces and noises at the baby and reached for him, cuddled him, kissed his cheeks. All she wanted was to be left alone and to sleep. She pretended, though, enough so that no one knew but the baby. He knew and reacted by not relaxing when she held him or crying until Mrs. Bailey took him away from her. Mrs. Bailey knew, too. She gazed at Polly sympathetically while telling the world how well everyone was adjusting. Nor did she remark when they were alone that Polly would feel like a real mother soon enough. Polly noticed these considerate attentions and appreciated them immeasurably. She'd never before understood the value of being left alone, or had met a person who knew how to do it so thoughtfully. She let the care roll over her and slept for weeks. One day while the baby was lying next to her on the sofa, he lifted his foot and pointed it toward her. She leaned toward him and the foot wobbled, but with great effort he pushed it closer and closer and finally pressed it against her cheek. How had he done that? Did he do it on purpose? It had certainly seemed deliberate. She closed his foot in her hand and jiggled it, and he laughed. She tried it again, and he laughed again, and when she let go, his wobbling foot pressed forward toward her face. She played the game with him until she was convinced he knew what he was doing. How clever of him! What a brilliant baby! She called Bailey in to see. He wants attention like all men, Bailey said. She bent down to coo at James and emitted a puff of powder from inside her dress. I don't think I mind giving it, Polly said. That's how they rule the world. Mrs. Bailey sighed and ran an efficient finger into the front of James's diaper. Time for a change. She bent to pick him up. Show me how, Polly said. After that, all Polly wanted to do was wake up in the morning and see James again. Once he entered her mind, he never left.
Thank you, Alice.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Now, is that from the forthcoming novel?
Yes.
And so can you give us a quick summary, or not summary, but you know what I mean, like a teaser for the upcoming novel?
Sure. It's a land plot. It's two Quaker women from Philadelphia, and they have shares in a fellowship point, which is a point of land in Maine that has been in their families since the 1870s. It was started by a group of Quakers from Philadelphia, and now they're getting old and they're trying to figure out what's going to happen to the land after they die.
Interesting. And what
It's
got you?
also their friendship, lifelong friendship since they were born.
And what got you interested in this space, this place? Is this a place that you know or that you just heard of?
Well, it's a made-up place. I've spent a lot of time in Maine, and I love Maine. And I grew up in Philadelphia, surrounded by Quakers, and loved the Quaker culture. It's fascinating, and wanted to write about it. So a lot of the book is things that I've always been interested in, and now I had a chance to research and put into a story.
Did your child do the Friends School thing?
My child?
Yeah.
No, he went to public school.
Was that a temptation though? Was it like a? Oh.
If I had the money, yeah, maybe.
Yeah, for Quaker, they're very expensive. Those Quaker schools.
Yeah.
My son went to a Quaker school for like preschool, and they're for real. I love them. They were expensive though.
They are for real. I went to a school growing up that had been a Quaker school. It's called Shipley. It's in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. And it changed. It stopped being Quaker at a certain point, but we still had quiet day and quiet hour and all kinds of leftover Quaker stuff.
So oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go. Speak.
So I have a question. I once went and saw something about Quakers, and I find Quakers actually really interesting. Like everything about it, the egalitarian society, and there's that moment in history that I remember when I took this tour of one of the places that they said at a certain point the church used to have two entrances, one for men and one for women. And at a certain point, it was reconstructed. It must have burned down, and then they rebuilt it. And then there was only one door. And the guide actually said, "Oh yes, that's when one of the female, I can't remember what they're called, but she said, "Oh, that's when evil entered the church." I was so moved by that. I was like, I love the Quakers.
That's funny.
Okay, so this scene that you read is about this woman with this very small child, and your son is actually out of the house. He's a writer himself. Like, what, looking back, is it easier to write about that period now, or were you always writing about? I mean, I find it really hard to write about young children still, because I feel like even though my kids are getting older, I'm still in it. How do you feel about it?
Well, this was not about my child. This experience was nothing like my experience, but I think it's easier now. I think I wrote a lot about being a mother and having a young child when my child was young, but it's easier to make things up now. I think being in it, I just was in my own experience and I couldn't make up another person's experience, but now I can.
Do you ever write anything that borders on the line of, should I ask them first? I mean, I guess this pertains to all the authors, but sometimes I find that, oh, maybe I should not write about this because maybe that's going to bother him. Do you ever get moments like that? Like it's not him, clearly, because it's fiction, right? But like, he's going to know that incident is him, right? So sometimes like that happens to me. I don't know if it ever happens.
I'm kind of in the opposite position because he writes about me a lot.
That must be really interesting when your kid is writing about you.
Yeah.
And you're like, wait, that's my material.
He just published an essay called 6 Degrees of Separation Between My Traumatic Birth and the Iran Hostage Crisis. It was interesting. It was interesting. It just showed how much he'd been listening.
There you go. Oh, yeah. The eyebrows raised thing.
How about you, Joshua? Do you ever have issues? Like, I mean, you write only fiction as well, but do you ever have these issues?
You know, it's interesting. I mean, I think Updike said that life got hard when his kids learned how to read. And I think that may be true. You know, my kids have not read my books. I mean, so I haven't had to worry about that yet. I worried more about my parents reading my books, but I think that will change as time goes on.
So intrigued. Are you more interested in your kids reading your book or not reading your book? Like ultimately, when they're grown, do you want them to or not want them to?
I want them to read, whether it's my book or not.
Full stop.
I don't care. No, I actually don't. I don't feel invested in their reading it and reading things I've written, but nor am I opposed to it. They're here, so they can probably hear me. But my younger daughter is more of a reader than my older daughter. So if reading my book will get my older daughter to read, then sure, go for it.
Sure. Let's just pull up a comment from the audience. Hold on a second. Here we go. Joseph Kennedy, who's watching on YouTube, says, there's a great cartoon where a young woman is having a book signing and a couple is there saying, if we knew you were going to be an author, we would have been better parents. Good point. Not a question, but hilarious. True, Joe Kennedy. You're not wrong.
Can I ask a question to Alice?
Of course. Yes,
Alice,
do it.
Because I know you're at Rutgers, Newark. Do you know Rigoberto Gonzalez?
It very, very well.
So he's one of my best friends, and he's in our collection. His latest essay is in the Pantla Familia.
I was going to ask you that afterward because I thought probably so.
Yeah, Rigoberto is the director of the MFA program at Rutgers Newark.
Mm-hmm.
Ah.
And he's a fantastic writer, a great poet.
He is. He's a great person.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's wonderful.
Nilda, did you have a question?
I do. I have a crazy question. So can you describe the first thing that you ever published and were paid for? Did you have kids already? And if not, where were you in your life cycle, in your life stage? What was the first thing that you published that you got paid for? None of them have ever been paid because they're all literary writers. They're still thinking like, when do I get?
I know exactly.
So say it.
It was a story called The Gardener that appeared in American Way magazine, that in-flight magazine you get in American Airlines.
Yeah.
And I think they paid me $1,000, and I was like thrilled.
That's pretty good.
I happened to take a flight like right around that time, and like it was in my front seat, so I thought that was pretty cool.
That's really cool.
That's
and
awesome.
Where were you in your life? Like, were you young,
I was just writing.
or
I was in grad school writing stories.
wow.
You know, I didn't even have a book out yet.
So what charmed you into sending it to a travel magazine and not to a
you know,
literary magazine?
I didn't know. I was not sophisticated like Joshua and Alice. You know, I didn't know what I was doing. I just wrote and I sent it out, and if they published it, I was thrilled. And then somebody said, you know, much later, after several books into published, said, you know, you should have gotten an MFA. I said, what's that? So, you know, I had no clue. I was just writing and publishing and moving forward. So, you know, if I had kind of a more sophisticated ideas and a background in which people really connected me with things, I probably would have started in a different world. But for me, it was just terrific. It was a magazine I knew, and they paid well, and they only took first North American serial rights. So I sold the story again.
Nice. Well done, you.
Yeah.
How about you guys, Alice, Joshua? Do you remember your first published paid piece?
I think the first thing I was paid for was probably my first book, and it was published. The pub date was actually the day my son was born.
Oh, wow.
They happened at the same time.
Wow.
So
at once.
Did you have the launch party before the birth or well after the birth? Did you have a little baby at the launch party?
It was a little bit complicated. Yeah. I think I didn't have a lot of opportunity to focus on the book after he came.
Sure.
I was really anxious. I think I kept calling the doctor and saying, I don't think he's lifting his head. And meanwhile, I'd be like waiting to go do a reading. And I think it was just displaced anxiety.
Wow. That's wild. I mean, that must have been a really difficult time to try to do both, because so when you say he wasn't lifting his head, did you have some complications around?
No, he
was fine. You were nervous.
I was just a little anxious.
That's a first kid. It's always terror. What is this? Wow. But that's so interesting that it melded. How was it? How did your people respond? The editor and the agent, how did they deal with the fact that you had this baby right when you were supposed to be doing book tours and signings and launches? Were they good with it? Were they bad with it? Like, remember, this is our thing. Like, we talk about this. So,
it wasn't that my book was not that monumental that it really disturbed them that much. Aww. It wasn't that I would, it was my first book. It was a short story collection. It wasn't changing the world by any stretch of the imagination. So I don't think it fazed them.
Were you okay?
Yes. I would have liked them to be separated a little bit more than they were. It really was the exact same day, but it was fine.
I will never forget it.
I was happy about both things. So
I do think that launching now is really different than launching. When did that book come out?
That was 1991.
Yeah, I mean, it was really different back then. I mean, a launch now is it's like, you're expected to do social media. You're expected to do your own publicity. I think launching back then was a little bit differently in that the publishers actually did more and they helped kind of get the readings and stuff. Am I correct, Alice, or am I wrong?
I think that's right.
Yeah. I mean, now it's like up to the authors pretty much. So, right, Alice?
Yeah. It definitely has changed dramatically. social media has changed everything.
It really has. Joshua, we cut you off on your what you were going to say.
Oh no, I don't really have much of a story. I don't even know if this counts. I mean, I was working for a magazine after I graduated from college, and I published a bunch of reviews, and I probably got paid some pittance for them. And I was just starting to write fiction at the time. This is long before I had kids, so it made it easier in a lot of ways.
Do you remember your first published fiction?
I do. I mean, I published a few short stories around the same time, and whether I got paid in publisher's copies or in like high two-figure checks, I'm not sure. but it was one of those.
Oh, those two-figure checks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I have a question that I'm just kind of interested in, because summer's coming, and I remember summer before kids was like, oh, summer. Now it's like, oh, summer. Now I've got to figure out how to like actually relax when my kid is off school and I have to actually deal with them, right? And my older son, he was supposed to, he's been dying to get out. And he felt like a prisoner, but so he wanted to do like college courses and stuff and try to get some college courses going. But the problem is that he would be stuck at home doing it because they're virtual. So and now I've got to deal with both of them during the summer, and it's not going to be very relaxing. But you guys, where are you in it? I mean, Alice, you have one that's out, and Sergio, you have two that are, one's in Chicago, one is where? Boston?
He's in their apartment in New York doing
there you go.
the second year of Yale Law School virtually. And so I have two 26 and a 24-year-old. But the parenting is different, but still very involved. We had a long discussion with him yesterday about whether he should take his final exam today or tomorrow and what his strategy should be. And so you're more of a consultant rather than hands-on when they're small, very small. But
You're a consultant. I was fired.
Yeah, well.
I turned 18 and said, thank you, Mom. You were a great mom.
One of the most frightening things that happened to me in New York City is I sort of became my father. I criticized him for being so tough on us. Well, my kids called me the toughest father on the Upper West Side. Because I'll be honest, I thought parenting on the Upper West Side was dismal. They did not know how to work. The Upper West Side, very pampered, well-to-do kids, they did not know how to work. And I taught them that value of the Mexican immigrant values I learned. When they didn't have homework, I gave them homework. Saturdays, Sundays. Every summer, they did extra math classes, extra language classes, and they kind of hated it, but they did exceptionally well. And so I taught them what my father taught me, which was, if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. Nietzsche.
We have a comment from the audience, a comment from I saying, Sergio, who's the Mexican Stalin now?
I am. I know. I am. That's the problem. And I look in the mirror and I said, "What happened? Oh my God!" So, but I just taught them what I knew worked, and now, of course, now that they're adults, they do whatever they want, but they know how to crack that nut. Whatever they want.
So one thing that's been very interesting, and I mean, Sergio, you're a very strict father, as you've admitted or embraced, and so one of the things that people constantly have issues with is how do they get work done when the kids are small? And you've all been through the phase where the kids are, 2 to 5, where it's so hard, where they really just want attention all the time. And if you are, how did you manage that? Did you trade off? Did you have somebody who was able to deal with them full time so that you could work on your own by yourself? Did you have an office? Did you do it in the closet? Like how did you all manage when your kids were really tiny to get some writing done? Not infants, but like the hard part, the really hard part.
Well, My wife and I have a tag team relationship. We really have, worked together, we to help each other out. So, and it's exhausting. And I just felt like working in the middle of chaos. I simply got used to working with the little kids running around and dumping my computer and breaking it, and then writing, still and whatever worked. And I just got used to that. And I got used to working at 3 a.m., when they're asleep. And it's exhausting.
Did you wake up at 3 or did you stay up till 3?
I stayed up till 3 working, because that's the only time when I would have peace. Mm-hmm. And so, I think Laura, my wife, was a fantastic mother and basically would give me, weekends, and I was responsible for Monday through Friday, during the day, when they would come home. We also trained them to be independent as soon as they could, very early, 9-10-year-olds, to get on the subway and get themselves home. And I know that's I'm not sure I would do it now, but that's what we did, to make them independent, and push them to be independent, and then hold them accountable. And there was still chaos. I would tell people, you see these things, these lines under my eyes, when my kids were 5 and 6 and 7 and 9, and I was running on 4 hours of sleep max, and my wife was too. So,
you could probably tell how old my kids are by the lines on my face. Like every year I get a new one.
Yeah.
Alice, what did you do to be able to work when your child was small?
I found it extremely difficult. I've always been a daily writer, and I kept it up. It's just my lifestyle, but I could find time, just the way Sergio said, just by, one end of the day or the other, when the baby was asleep or the child was asleep, I could find time. But I did not have the mental space. He had invaded my head, and I really did not break free of that until he went to college and moved out of the house. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I found it really hard. I just kept going and did what I could, but looking back, I think I would do it differently now if I knew what I knew. If I knew what I knew now,
what would you do differently?
I would take a little bit of pressure off myself.
Wow.
I felt so intent that I had to still keep up with my writing. And, childhood is short, it's brief. Like, those years are brief. And I think I would just take some pressure off and say, just be with the kid for a couple of years. It's not going to last.
But don't you think that you would have it would have been hard to get back into it? Most of the people that we've talked to who have taken a break have had a quite hard time getting back into it, like stopping going to the gym. If they completely stopped for several years, it's not that that's a bad thing. It's just that when they decided it was now time to go back to it, I don't know anybody who was like, okay, now I'm ready to go. They were all like, they had angst, they had like self-doubt, and like, what, did they lose it? And then so that getting back started has always been one of the things we encourage, is that people do what they can so that they're not completely giving it up for a couple of years, only because the people that we've spoken to who did give it up entirely have had some difficulty in getting back into it.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, and it's probably true.
Maybe there's a grass is always greener thing.
I did the other thing because I had the fear of what you're talking about.
Sure, and you don't want to be buried in guilt either. But
I also think that people didn't really talk about parenthood so much even 10 years ago. And I remember when I had my kids, I had an exceptionally difficult time, and there was really no support. Now there's a lot more support. People talk about it more. I don't know, maybe it was me, but I had this idea that if I was a parent, that maybe I wasn't a real writer, but then it really screwed me up, because then I really couldn't write. So it wasn't until I was like, okay, you know what? I have to write no matter what, that like I was able to just kind of get back.
I kind of agree with Alice that I think, not that you should take off a couple of years, but I don't think, it doesn't seem to me to be that problematic a thing. And I'm thinking what you're saying, Em, I mean, about people having trouble getting back because there's all this angst. I think there's a lot of angst whether you're a parent or not. And I mean, I teach graduate students. And so every year I see how hard it is for everyone. And most of them don't have kids. And, you know, what I tell them is that, you know, they're trying to figure out how to like live in New York City and write 3 stories a semester and hopefully publish their books eventually and so on and so forth. And they have this idea that it's going to get easier, but it's not going to get easier. And certainly if they have kids, it will get harder. So I guess I kind of feel like it's always hard, and if it's important to you, you have to find a way to do it. And I mean, it's obviously harder if you have kids, but I kind of feel like if people are determined to do it, I feel very fortunate. Like my wife and I are both, my wife's an academic, so we both have 3-month summers, and we don't have jobs where we have to be in the office all day, and our kids were in daycare from 3 months old, but we still have to take care of them, and we still got no sleep. And
Sleep.
you know, it's interesting. I mean, among my graduate students, not always the ones who have more time who make it work. Sometimes they're the ones who have less time who make it work. So I do think that having children provides unique challenges, but there are other kinds of unique challenges.
There are plenty
Yeah.
of unique
So,
challenges.
yeah.
We're just here to support the child-related ones, but everybody's there's plenty of
Totally.
stuff
But I
to
guess
worry about.
I kind of feel like if someone takes off 3 years to hang out with their kids and then can't get back to writing afterwards, and maybe, you know, maybe that's not what they're supposed to be. I mean, I don't think, like, I tell my students all the time, it's like, for some of my very best students are not writing. It just doesn't make them happy. That seems okay, you know, so, and I've seen people take off time and then come back to it. So I feel like there are a lot of different ways to do it.
That's true enough. Listen, we have a question from YouTube. David Harris wants to know, it's for Sergio. Sergio, given the essay that you read, he's wondering if your motivation ever flags.
No. The short answer is no, because I remember my grandmother. She's been my muse, you know, my mother's mother. She was a great human being who told you to your face. And I would bring Ivy Leaguers, you know, back to Texas and tell her, oh, this guy's a little liar. You know, don't even listen to him. She was this truth teller. And she had shot and killed 2 men who attempted to rape her as a teenager during the Mexican Revolution. She was this tough as nails woman who ran her household with an iron fist. And a very, you know, and so in my head, in the last collection of stories, a version of her appears in the last story that appeared in the Yale Review. I hear her. And so in my mind, I don't have a right to not be motivated. If I am not writing, I'm disappointing her. And she's been dead 15, 20 years, but I hear her in my head. Those are the first stories I wrote about her, because people needed to listen to a person like that, to a survivor like that, to a woman like that, who in a place where there's machismo everywhere, if my grandfather didn't hand over his gardening money, she would take a broomstick and hit him on the head with it. And she, you know, and it was a very unusual person. And she was not into social niceties. She was into being righteous and telling you what to do. And when I wanted to quit, you know, at Harvard, and I said, I'm the only Mexican in my dorm and I don't belong, she said, don't come, you know, and MCI, I called her an MCI, I remember that. And she said, Sergio, don't come back with your tail between your legs. This is what you wanted. Show them who you are. You know, and so for me, that's my motivation. I don't need any other motivation than that. So for me, it's I'm still hungry. I'm still going to bust my ass and push myself. 8 books is 8 books too few. You know, life is short. And I think she taught me that. My grandmother taught me that.
All right, this is gorgeous. Now I want to know what everybody else's motivation is, because Sergio's is so motivating. What keeps you writing, Alice? What keeps you going now? Like, what is it that made you write this one more book? Like, what is it? What's making it happen?
I find it to be my safe space. To use a current term, I love to go to the writing desk. And that just gets more and more as time goes by, because I've gotten a lot better at it over time. I used to be much more frustrated than I am now. Now I feel very confident that the answer will come. And it might not be for a year, it might not be for 2 years, but it will come. So I'm very relaxed when I sit down to write. And that's the motivation, really. It's a place that I just feel really my most relaxed self, I think.
Nice. And Joshua, what about you?
Yeah, I guess I would say it's some version of that as well. I mean, I have a book coming out in a month, and this is the period I hate most because,
Waiting.
well, I mean, sure, but I just mean sort of like, there's so much that's not in your control in terms of, what the reviews will be like and, sales figures and things like that. But when you're writing, you are in full control. I don't mean that you can always make it work, but you can always keep trying. Mm-hmm. And I feel like, I feel more relaxed when I'm writing, and I like to spend time with my character. I'm happiest when I'm writing. That doesn't mean that I am not endlessly frustrated or that I'm not sometimes disappointed with the results. I mean, you always are. It's always never as good as you hope it will be, although never as bad as you fear. But yeah, I think there's something about you can kind of do anything, and you're creating a world, and that is. I find that very liberating. So that I do find the time that I'm writing is the time that I'm fundamentally most relaxed. And so, my motivation is because it makes me happy.
I love it. Listen, I can't believe that we have already had an hour of conversation. It has flown by. I am so grateful to you, to Alice and Joshua and Sergio, of course, Christina, for coming. And I'm just going to crown myself because this is my 100th anniversary. It's my 100th show. So yay, I'm the Queen of Salons today. Thank you very much. And thank you all for coming to this live broadcast, who's out in the audience today. And thank you all for who watched the playback to the end, because that's your, you get a crown. You get a crown. Everybody, thank you for coming. Come back next September when we have 3 new authors for you. All of them will have kids, and they'll all talk about how they did it. So thanks a lot.